fatted frogs, or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes. Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together Rebecca and I are about to craft an unforgettable hour of radio called For a Green Future.
Whose pen is incredibly dead. This is bad. Okay.
Well, luckily this is radio, so you're not like going to be holding anything up to the camera. Any notes that you've written.
It's just like a security thing.
Okay. Okay, Josh.
Self-soothing object. Thank you, Josh.
Our tech just handed Rebecca a new
Save
pen.
the day, yeah.
So, all right, we're ready to go. And so, For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your health, your wealth, your happiness. And this is going to be kind of an atypical show here because we don't have a guest this week. Normally we try to get a guest on here every week, but there was just so much to tell you about my cruise. I went on a big 8-night cruise down to the Caribbean last week, and I got all kinds of notes and things to talk about in terms of that. But before I get to that, after I get to that, let me say, just to tell you the rest of the show. So first, we'll be talking for the next half hour or so here, and you can join us at any point by calling in at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. And you can call about any kind of ecological or environmental question or issue. You don't have to call about what we're talking about, but we'd be happy to talk to you. And you can also, at any point during the show, text at 419-973-5841. We've got our text recording device all set up here. And, I just wanted to say a couple things before we get into the show proper. And so once we get through the next half hour or so, then we're going to hear from our wonderful sponsors and patrons. Then Rebecca has a nice report for us. What are we going to talk about this week, Rebecca?
We're going to talk about Muslim environmental activism.
Muslim environmental activism.
In honor of Ramadan, which it is.
Okay, great. So that's coming up after the break. And then we've got ecological news from around the world, various interesting environmental stories that we've dug up. And as I say, at any point, hopefully we're going to hear from you. Before we get into the show proper, there's a couple things I wanted to mention. One, last week we had 1,200 downloads on our podcast. And so I just want to say thank you and welcome to all our new podcast listeners.
Yes.
Yes, as you know, the show airs live right now. We record that, and then we turn that into both a podcast and a YouTube video version. So thanks so much to those folks, and welcome to the show. Hope you like it. We also have last week's show. I actually didn't do a show last week. Regular listeners know that what we did was we played a recording of an old show, and actually that was a show where I was played a recording of my initial testimony before the House Bill 6 subcommittee, fighting that evil, horrible law that eliminated subsidies for wind and solar and gave it to nuclear and coal instead. And the hearing that I testified at, I just wanted to mention one thing about last week's recorded show. During my testimony there, I said that Davis-Besse, like other nuclear power plants, put waste heat water into Lake Erie, and that encourages algal growth. Now, since that testimony, Dick Stein, one of our House of Representatives members who was instrumental in pushing House Bill 6 through that subcommittee and getting it on the floor for people to vote on, which turned out, of course, that whole bill was caused by bribery scandals and horrible corporate, First Energy corporate malfeasance. But he said that Davis-Besse doesn't do that. And I was also told that by Haraz Ganbari, my representative, that Davis Bessie somehow doesn't. Now, I know for a fact most nuclear plants do, and that's why they're located on big bodies of water like Lake Erie. Fermi 2 nuclear power plant, for example, just over the border there in Michigan, I know for certain they dump hot water into the lake because a diver who was sent down there to look for zebra mussels got killed by the hot water that was coming out of that pipe. But I was kind of prepared to do a disclaimer this week. But the thing is that I'm discovering, or, I started researching it. I'm not ready to do the disclaimer because I found an NPDES permit for Davis Bessie. And NPDES, basically, for those who aren't, deep into the environmental community, that's the permit that the federal government gives you to go ahead and put pollution into whatever body of water or the air or wherever. It's the little piece of paper that says, yes, you can pollute, and here's how much you can pollute. And on page 25 of that permit, 25 out of 53, I looked, and lo and behold, I found that the temperature of the water coming out of Davis Bessie at outflow number 1, which is the place where the canal comes off the plant, is a 23.15 degrees centigrade, which actually works out to 73.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a good almost 3 degrees higher than the highest temperature Lake Erie gets to in the middle of July. And so I'm not ready to retract that statement yet. The idea that Davis Bessie is putting hot water into Lake Erie, and it does encourage algal blooms. I'll note that now that people have questioned that, but I have direct evidence that they are.
It looks as if they probably are. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Davis Bessie has 3 other, what they call outfalls, 3 other points where it puts water into the lake. And all 3 of those have a lower average temperature than the one they put here. And interestingly, a couple other interesting things about this NPDES permit. They only took the temperature in the summer.
Okay.
They didn't even take a temperature in the winter, which, if the water's going in at 73 in the wintertime, that's obviously much higher than the lake temperature. And one thing I didn't know, they don't check for tritium. They don't check for any kind of radioactivity. And it seems to me that would be the one thing you'd look for in an outfall from a nuclear power plant. But they don't even check for it, so we don't know. Plenty of other pollutants, though. 41,000 kilograms a day of sulfates, a bunch of aluminum and iron. They put lots of nasty stuff into the lake. But I'm still working on that question of if Davis Bessie specifically puts hot water into the lake. So just wanted to say that about last week's show. All right, so this week, though, as promised, I got to talk about my fantastic trip down to the Caribbean.
Yes.
Those of you who are regular listeners to the show know that my late wife, Carolyn, she always wanted to go on a cruise, on a Caribbean cruise. And I was always kind of like, that's a lot of carbon.
Rick Steves says that going on cruises in Greece of the islands is actually a pretty good way to see Greek islands. Well, otherwise, he doesn't recommend them. Yeah,
well, cruises, I'd never been on one before, and I learned all kinds of stuff. For one thing, I learned that it's a subculture.
Right.
I did not know. I always assumed cruises were something people did once or twice in their life, like when they retired or when they had their 50th wedding anniversary. But no, there's a whole bunch of people that...
There's a whole subset of Mississippi River gambling cruises, which actually have this sparkly black sort of duster thingy, which I inherited from someone who went on a lot of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they have.
It's an artifact of cruising culture.
I see.
It's black and sparkly and very voluminous.
Yes. Nice looking. Yeah,
so you can look sharp while you're sitting there drinking and gambling.
Right, and losing your money. Yeah.
Yep.
But so people spend their whole lives, build their whole lives around taking cruises. And in fact, on the cruise I was on, there was a fella called Super Mario who literally just spends all his time on the cruise. He spends about $65,000 a year on cruise ships, and he gets all kinds of perks. They had roped off a little section of the pool area that said Super Mario's office.
I'm going to need for him to do some actual plumbing before I accept that he deserves that nickname. I'm sorry.
So, but so there's a lot of people that take a lot of cruises. And it was just, I wanted to tell you first a little bit about my trip down there to try to get on the ship. And then I'll, about the things I learned on the stops. And then a little bit I figured out, some other observations. So starting with the trip down there, and, I tried to assuage my guilt at putting so much carbon in the air by taking Amtrak down instead of flying, because, air travel puts tons of carbon in the air for every trip, and trains are much more efficient. So I booked myself.
Also, they're nice and spacious and relaxing and nice, not like awful, crowded, stressful airplanes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's all kinds of advantages to being on a train versus being on a plane. I mean, the amount of room you get on a train seat is just, it's like 3 or 4 airplane seats put together.
Yep.
But I went to get on the train, and it was supposed to come at just about midnight on the day I was getting on it. And unfortunately, it left about 2 hours late. And that worried me a little bit, because my connection in Washington, D.C. to go down to Miami only had 3 hours in between arrival of my train and the departure of the next train. But we got on and we started going along, and it was very nice. But then in Latona, Ohio, just before we got out of Ohio, unfortunately the train hit somebody in the middle of the night. A fellow by the name of Stephen Fisher was hit and killed by the train, which immediately the train had to pull over. The police came. They had to take pictures of everything and interview the engineer. He had to fill out all kinds of paperwork. And so the train started up again, and now the train is 4 hours late.
So there's suddenly a potential crime scene directly in your path, depending on whether or not he was pushed.
Yeah, it's directly behind us.
He probably was not, but still.
No, it doesn't look like he was pushed, but it was pretty sad that the train actually hit somebody. But now I'm 4 hours late heading towards DC, and I realize there's no way the train's going to make up the time. I cannot catch my connector down to Miami in time to get on the boat. I mean, Amtrak helpfully offered to reschedule me for the next day, but that train would have gotten me to Miami about 4 hours after the boat actually left the dock. So I desperately tried to make some other kinds of arrangements, but we were going through all these tunnels and mountain in between mountains in Pennsylvania, and my phone kept cutting out. So it was literally impossible. I did manage to get off a text to a friend of mine who lives in DC, and she was nice enough to take the time and to front me the money. She actually bought me a plane ticket from BWI, Baltimore Washington International Airport, down to Miami. So it was, we got into DC. I hopped off the Amtrak, ran over, got on the MARC, which is the regional railroad in the Washington, D.C. area, took that out to the airport, ran over to the terminal because, time was getting close again, and turns out my plane there was 2 hours late. So, and the reason there is because they couldn't find any pilots. They said, they made an announcement, said the plane's all ready to go, but we don't have any pilots. So that plane left 2 hours late, which got me into Miami at 2 o'clock in the morning, and a full day before I was expecting to be there, because I was expecting to take the train.
It's very odd that all the delays made you early somehow.
Yeah, it is. But, so I find myself in Miami at 2 in the morning with no hotel room, no arrangements. And I did what my usual strategy is in that situation. I followed the first nice-looking couple onto an airport shuttle.
Ah, okay.
Because I figure, that's a couple. They've probably done their homework. They're probably on their way to a pretty good hotel. And so I just followed them on. But in this case, it failed utterly. because I
They were going. The next couple was going to sell drugs or something.
no, they went to the Sheraton.
They had a illegally obtained liver in their actually briefcase, and we're going to.
No, I'm pretty sure not. They didn't have any kind of cooler.
Oh, it was just a Sheraton. Oh, that's
Yeah. So we got to the Sheraton, and they told me at the Sheraton, no, sorry, we don't have any more rooms, and you're not going to find any rooms in the city of Miami. Because it turns out there was something called Ultra that weekend, which is a music festival I'd never heard of, that 200,000 people were descending on Miami for that weekend for this incredible music festival.
Yowza.
And so...
Next question, is there any all-night cafes in the area? And where's the nearest Denny's?
Yeah, and, I could have checked up with Paul, who's got like a tent under the underpass. But
there we go.
So I rode the shuttle back to the airport. I made some, frantic calls, Travelocity and a couple of things like that. And they all said, nope, sorry, no hotel rooms in Miami. Turns out there's 50,000 hotel rooms in Miami, but 200,000 people had come for that weekend.
Okay.
And but I did finally do some creative Google searching and managed to call a hotel that said, oh, yes, we do have a room, but you have to come here into the lobby to get it. So taxi ride later, I managed to finally get a room, although I paid an extortionist price on it. And then I wandered around Miami for an extra day. I went to the Science Museum, which was nice.
Nice.
One thing at the Science Museum, though, I did find that they had a lot of science museums have like this alternative energy display up on their roof. Like it says, oh, here's some nice solar panels and wind turbines. And they had one where you could take a plug from the solar panel and plug it in and see the lights light up, but it was all broken. And I noticed that's sort of a pattern in a lot of these places, is that the alternative energy displays, either don't work, or like they'll have one where you have to turn a crank to light a light bulb, and they've got them geared so that it's almost impossible to do it, even though
a lot of stuff doesn't work. Like I've been to our science museum in Toledo, and like a lot of stuff was sort of hadn't been repaired,
Yeah, but it's sort of,
a couple things anyway.
It's sort of a pattern I've noticed, the stuff that could viscerally kind of show people how well alternative energy works is broken.
Right, yeah, of course, yeah.
So, but otherwise, it was a very nice museum. I like it. I recommend it. And then that evening, I kind of checked out Ultra. I didn't go into it because it was sold out, but B, because it was 200,000 people and probably half a dozen masks.
Also, I should point out that the entryway to the Would You Survive Jurassic Park maze was not clearly pointed, so I ended up going through it all the way backwards and didn't understand it.
Oh, at the Science Museum?
Yes.
I see. Okay. So it was a nice time, and the only other thing worth noting is that I called my cruise line and I said, okay, so where do I actually physically get on the boat? And they told me Terminal A at the Miami port. And so the next morning I went there really early because I didn't need to board till 2:30, but I went at 8 o'clock because I knew once 200,000 people woke up from the festival the night before, there'd be no taxis in the state in Miami.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
And it was a good thing I did too, because even though when I got there, I asked a couple people, is this my boat? The name of my boat was really close to the name of another boat.
Oh no!
So I was told yes, and so I waited a couple hours and then started trying to board, and I got all the way up the gangplank and almost on the boat, and they said, "Oh, this isn't your ship.
No,
you're supposed to be at Terminal G, not
thing
Terminal
you were
A."
Early. Geez, oh, Pete.
Yeah, so I had to walk a little over a mile, dragging my luggage.
Oh my God!
From the Terminal A down to Terminal G, and what was the one kind of nice thing about that was I really got a sense of the scale of these ships, because
no doubt
I had to walk past like half a dozen of them, and they are just huge. They're just incredible uses of resources. But I finally did manage to get on the ship and just had I got to admit, I loved it. It was a wonderful time, getting doted on, getting, as much food as you want, whenever you want it. And I drank a lot more than I usually drink. I usually don't drink anything.
He doesn't look like he gained a lot of weight. I want to point that out.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. 3 pounds.
Okay, yeah, it is 3 pounds.
I gained 3 pounds. But interestingly, the scale on the ship I'm pretty sure it was like turned back a little bit.
Oh, I bet it was.
So when I was checking myself, I'd go to the gym and like get on there. And it's like, oh, I've actually lost some weight. No. Yeah, but but it was great. It was incredibly luxurious, and having my stateroom cleaned twice a day.
Oh my!
I have trouble with that. I have trouble letting people dote on me.
Yeah.
But I got better at it by the end of the
I bet you get used to this. Yeah.
And we stopped at a lot of interesting places. We stopped in Haiti, where I went some snorkeling on a reef, and actually saw for myself the beautiful little fish and the sponges and the corals and all those things that you see on the documentaries. They really exist. I've actually seen them now. That was fun. Puerto Rico, we went from Haiti to Puerto Rico, and there I got to go to see the rainforest up on the top of the mountain there, and that was incredibly lush. It was the first time I've really seen tropical level lushness in an ecosystem. Cool. And we reported on what happened in Puerto Rico back in Hurricane Maria, when this rainforest was completely wiped out by the hurricane, and the pictures were just of incredible devastation. And I'm happy to report that the forest itself has come all the way back. It looks really healthy and lush and so forth. We also have often reported on the fate of the coqui frog,
right,
which is a frog native to Puerto Rico. And unfortunately I only heard one coqui the whole time I was up there in that rainforest. So they haven't come all the way back yet. You're supposed to be hearing hundreds of them in the middle of the day like that. But it was beautiful, and there'll be pictures on the YouTube.
They're in Hawaii destroying the native frogs there, apparently.
Yeah, they are, and actually bringing down real estate values, apparently, because they're so loud and there's so many of them now in Hawaii that people can't actually sleep at night.
Oh my God.
So. But one interesting geological aspect of Puerto Rico and all the islands that I went to, you could really see the effect of islands on weather, because all the islands made their own weather. They all had their own clouds and things around them. But Puerto Rico, which had the highest mountain, had the rainforest on top, and that catches the clouds and causes the rain that then comes down the mountain and makes the whole island incredibly lush. None of the other islands that I went to had as high a mountain, and so none of the other ones had this kind of rainforest thing going. The next one I went to was St. Martin's, and that was really nice, but it was a much drier kind of island. It almost looked desert-like up in the mountains, and they had, but every little ditch and everything was full of fish and birds, and life was trying to sort of bust out all over at St. Martin's. That was beautiful, and the people, like I say, the people at all these islands were incredibly friendly. Even when I managed to get out of the bubble, every cruise ship area has this little bubble area just around the dock where Joe
escaped like an octopus.
Yes.
Out of an aquarium.
And I found that if you just get off the ship and start walking, half an hour or so clears you of the bubble, and now you're in the actual city that you're visiting,
right?
And just seeing people as they normally are, and that was I did that several times. I kind of had to do that, but I didn't do that at the last. Well, I did do that in the morning on the last stop at Antigua. I got out of the bubble, went to a little grocery store, and I got some Antigua money, much more colorful than ours.
Nice.
But most of the day at Antigua I spent on the beach, because they had an excursion offered by the cruise line, and I went to this beach, and I learned there, and I learned at the other islands too, that these islands are all powered by oil, by diesel. That's what they're using to generate electricity. And as I was at Antigua, the oil ship came in and docked at this little port thing off the beach to use a pipeline to pump down and fill up some storage tanks that were, behind the beach. And I just find it very interesting that there was very little solar anywhere down there. Antigua had the most rooftop solar, but most of the other islands had almost no solar to speak of, even though it would be the perfect place. And one of the tour guide in Puerto Rico said is because trying to put up solar down there is about 3 times as expensive as it is up here, which I don't know why that's so.
But you probably got to bring the panels overseas, but everything comes from someplace else now. So how is that a problem?
I don't know. And one thing about shipping on water, that's actually the cheapest way to move stuff is when you're, that's why if you have a canal coming in from the ocean, you can bring stuff in for really inexpensive.
But Donald Trump said that it was hard to get to the supplies to Puerto Rico after the hurricane because they were separated by lots and lots of water. So, according to the wisdom of our former leader.
Yeah, water.
Water's hard.
Yeah, it's not like we have the technology to solve that problem for 400 years or whatever. Yeah. And actually, that does bring up what I was doing in the downtime, like on the ship, between islands and so forth. I was actually started reading Charles Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle.
Cool.
Which was very interesting. And I got about halfway through it because it's like 400 pages. But it was interesting that he was talking about exactly the same things that we still talk about, which is invasive species coming in.
Yeah.
And, humans or, Westerners, Europeans, like destroying the native vegetation stuff. So this is a process that's been going on for a while. I also had some very startling, revelations reading that book. He was very just casual about the fact that people were like hunting Indians, like as a pastime. Like you talked about the governor of Argentina, that's what he did on the weekends to relax.
No, dear Lord.
Literally just hunted Indians. I was like, oh my God. Stuff that today, luckily, we think of as with horror, but back then it was just sort of casual. Yeah, most of us do. So that was my trip. Then we got back into Florida, and I actually took the excursion on the Everglades. Saw a couple interesting things there. One, I saw something called a purple sea hen, which is an invasive species I had no idea about before. But apparently, Hurricane Andrew broke open the purple sea hen enclosure at the Miami Zoo.
Oops.
And that was the source of this new invasive species, which has the unfortunate habit, this bird, of going along the shoreline and pulling up vegetation, and then it eats just the little base, the nutritious little base of those water plants.
Okay.
And lets the rest float on top to make like a mat, and then it hangs out on that mat.
Okay.
And just eats whatever bugs or anything that comes along. But it's very destructive. And the purple sea hen, it kind of versus the alligator. Okay, so I also on an airboat got to see a couple alligators in the swamp, and it kind of, this alligators versus purple sea hens kind of shows how the whole conservation ecology movement has kind of collapsed since it got its start back in the 70s. The alligator is one of the best examples of recovering an endangered species in history, because originally there were a couple million alligators in Florida, and they had been hunted literally almost down to extinction. They went from about 1 million down to 400 individuals. And then they went under endangered species protection, and all of a sudden it was illegal to hunt them, and they were protected, and we did our very best to bring them back, and we have. Alligators are back. They're everywhere. There's hundreds of thousands of them. They're no longer in danger of being extinct. So that was the 70s and 80s, back when we did things right. Now in the 2000s, these purple sea hens got released from the zoo, and the local biologists, the conservationists, saw this and started watching the problem when there were just less than 100 of them, when there were like a couple dozen. The point at which you can fix the problem, the point at which you can eradicate them and prevent an invasive species. And the state conservation agency actually tried to do that, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service stopped them and said, oh no, this bird is native to U.S. territories in the islands of the Pacific. So then we can't eliminate them because they're protected under the Migratory Bird Act, which is just, from the ecological standpoint, probably the stupidest thing you could even say, and instead the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service made that their official policy. And so even though there were a whole bunch of hunters like poised and ready to shoot and eat these invasive birds, and if things were governed by ecological principles instead of either stupidity.
Yeah, that's the word I was thinking.
They could have stopped the invasion back then, right after the hurricane, within a couple years, but instead the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service stopped them, and so they really have earned their nickname that I've given them as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Elimination Service. So
by that rationale, we should try to reintroduce gators to the sewers of New York, because
well, they might be on their way.
They're in U.S. territory.
They are moving up. They're moving north. They've gotten as far as the northern border of North Carolina is where.
Yeah, well, it's getting warmer, so they can probably go more places.
Yeah, exactly. And
so great, more alligators in waterways. That'll be fun.
Yeah, they're not far off. Well, but alligators, as people at this conservation park I went to are very quick to point out, alligators aren't aggressive. They're not the ones that are going to eat people. Crocodiles, on the other hand, will eat you if you give them a chance. So,
okay.
So just
they're looking for an excuse.
Right. So that's from an ecological perspective, that was my trip down to the Caribbean. And like I say, I would never have done it if Carol hadn't convinced me in 2019. It was on her bucket list, and we bought the tickets back in 2019, but COVID actually prevented us from going on the cruise when it was originally scheduled. It got canceled.
Because cruises are very COVID-y.
They are, and there were a lot of hurdles to getting on the cruise ship. But once we were on the cruise ship, they didn't enforce masks or anything like that. But I'm glad I went, and like I say, I did kind of get used to being pampered.
Yeah.
And and if I could find a zero carbon cruise, I might actually do it again, but we'll see.
You can always just go to the Caribbean and stay in one place. That way you kind of get more depth in your experience of a place, too.
That's true. And when I went to like St. Martin's and got out of the bubble, I did see a lot of people who were obviously expats, that people who had decided to go down there to retire, and the exchange rates are really favorable. The U.S. dollar goes way like 3 times as far as the local dollar does down there. So, it's a possibility. But despite the cold, I love it up here a little more. And,
yeah.
And actually, I do better in the cold than the hot. So.
Plus, it's not special if you live in a place all the time. Where are you going to go on vacation if you live in the Caribbean?
Yeah, right, exactly. That's a big problem. Than that? Right. And although I do have to admit that, occasionally I would get texts or messages from people saying, it's snowing here, and while I was on the beach. And, I kind of liked the fact that I wasn't getting snowed on.
Yeah, one time when I went to Wyoming, 5 to 10 years ago, whatever it was, and it was supposed to be, I was like, oh great, I'm going to Wyoming in January, everyone will be so jealous, and I got there and it was crazy. It was like 60 degrees all week, and it was like negative 30 here.
Wow. Yeah, that is crazy. So anyway, that's the story of my trip. If anybody wants to comment, if anybody wants to call me out for putting so much carbon in the air, be happy to hear from you. Give us a call at 877-909-1007 or text us at 419-973-5841. Okay, and off we go now to hear from our advertisers and sponsors. Hey, Four Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every single day of the year. And there's several ways you can get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can also go to their website, wcparks.org, and they have a nifty app. Go to any app store and search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District. And For a Green Future is also brought to you by our fantastic patrons. And these are people who went to our patreon.com page, that's Patreon, searched for For a Green Future. Up popped our remarkable Patreon page, and they went through and looked at the different membership levels, picked a level that fit their budget, and without their help, we could not be bringing you this show every week. So thank you very much to our patrons, and won't you consider becoming one of them at patreon.com. Oh, and I also do want to give a quick shout out to our tech Josh, because the first week I was on this cruise, I tried to do it live from the...
Some of you may remember it was rather a debacle. I hope all those people who downloaded our podcast are staying for this one.
Right, yeah. I had paid extra for the internet package, and I thought I could do the show from the ship. But yeah, that was a complete failure. Josh had to do some very quick last-minute stuff to get us through the hour. So thanks, Josh. That was a good job there. Yep, and he just gave me a thumbs up. Okay. So now, back to the regular show, and we get to hear from Rebecca. So, Rebecca, what do you have for us this week?
All right. Well, it's Ramadan, and it's the only Muslim holiday that Americans know about. Some of us, anyway. There are others. Actually, there's several other super important ones, but this is the big one that we know about. So I was thinking when I thought about the subjects of Muslims and ecology, I was thinking of specific things like experiences I've had, like the one time when I was a cab driver and I was dropping somebody off at McDonald's. No, wait a minute. I think I was waiting at a bus stop, actually. Yeah. That's because it was daylight. I never drove the cab during daylight. But yeah, I'm sitting there, and there's this guy in the head covering and sort of a long pants and a jacket, and he's just kind of going around and turning over like little bits of pavement in the McDonald's parking lot and picking up trash and things. And who that reminded me was Dr. Bob, the famous Toledo ecologist and activist who I remember once I ran into him on the street, and he was talking to me about something, and he just picked up just kind of stepped over a couple steps and picked up this piece of a chunk of curb that had come off and just quietly put it back, without missing a beat. And that was kind of, but apparently that ties in. I thought it was a really cool thing at the time, but there's apparently there's a thing about that in Islam about removing a harmful obstacle in the road being an act of faith or something like that. Or there's also like the taxi driver that I knew who took me to some medical appointments, who I believe he was from Kenya or someplace, and he was talking up a storm about his backyard gardening hobby and how he wanted to build a greenhouse and all this stuff. So, everywhere you can kind of count on some people in any group being involved in environmentalism, because common sense will out, and connection to nature is runs deep with human beings. But yeah, I ran across this article in The Conversation, or on their website, from 2020 by Monona Hussein. This is just one of many names which I'm going to butcher.
Okay.
Maybe it's Monoma. I also can't read my own handwriting, so yeah. She is apparently a PhD student in applied ecopsychology. And she talked a little bit about some Muslims, especially Muslim women, who are finding sort of a basis for their activism in their faith. One of the things that the article said was, reflecting and connecting with the earth fosters deep understanding of Allah and truth. Honoring and protecting the earth becomes an act of worship. And there's some quotes from the Quran that were included. One is, it is He who has appointed you vice regent of the earth. So it's the same thing as kind of the Christian concept of being stewards of the earth, I guess. That's from verse 165. I don't know how the Quran is structured.
I don't either, I'm afraid.
Yeah, but if that has meaning to you, you can look it up, or if you can figure it out. Also, all living beings roaming the earth and winged birds soaring in the sky are communities like yourselves. Verse 638. What are they? Surahs? They're called surahs, right?
Don't know.
Yeah, so, yeah, in a minute, when I get done, maybe Joel give the phone number. You can call and correct my ignorance. There's also the concept of mizan, or balance. So, by ensuring the natural balance, you're doing God's work in a way because of that. So So they gave some examples. There's this group, Faithfully Sustainable, which is an online discussion group for Muslims about ecological things, run by two women, Kadiatau Balde and Zainab Koli. Hopefully. Also, there's this woman who runs Eco Builders Senegal. Her name is Nidea Aida Marie Niede Gwene. Uses old tires and bottles and natural materials to build crop storage space. So basically silos. What we used to call silos in the Midwest. Or the equivalent of silos. Also, Mishka Baruni, I believe, is the co-founder of Utah Youth Environmental Solutions, trying to get Utah. They've been trying to get the Utah legislature to recognize climate change, which,
nice.
That's good luck to you.
It's Utah.
Utah, the state.
Oh, the state. Oh, Utah. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I was thinking it was some province in
Well,
Utah. Okay, got
also
it.
probably necessary.
The exotic area of Utah. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and let's see, there's Jana Jandal Alirifai, I believe, coordinator of Climate Strike Canada, who here it is. Yeah, removing a harmful object from the road is an act of charity.
Oh, nice.
So all these harmful things, removing them that hurt people is obviously something you would want to do. Or there's this one quote that I wanted to close with from the prophetic narration, which I do not know if this is part of the Quran or a commentary on the Quran or what it is. Someone call in and correct my ignorance, please. But I thought that was really beautiful. It says, if the final hour comes while you have a seedling in your hands, then let them plant it.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
It's just kind of, the same thing as saying what Terry Lodge said at the one time he got his award at the Lucas County Greens and gave his speech. And the thing that stuck with me about that was what he kept saying, hope is irrelevant. You do what is right. You don't sit there, well, I don't want to jump in and do petitioning and stuff because I might not win,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, action is much better than sitting around hoping always.
Right.
All right. Well, great. Thanks, Rebecca. And as Rebecca said, you can still call in. We got plenty of time, 877-909-1007, or text it, 419-973-5841. Okay, so now on to ecological news and some interesting things going on here. One, in our continuing coverage of the House Bill 6 scandal, I want to point out that there's a story in the Ohio Capitol Journal on April 4th. And one thing about internet is the titles have gotten awfully unwieldy. Here's the title. Former DeWine aide warned governor about utility regulator before the FBI raided his home, which is also a misplaced modifier because you don't know whose home got raided. But they're talking about Sam Randazzo, the fella that First Energy said they gave him a $4.3 million bribe to get House Bill 6 through the legislature. And he was, of course, Governor DeWine's choice for the head of the Public Utilities Commission, or PUCO, as it's called. And a fellow by the name of J.B. Haddon, basically before DeWine hired Randazzo, said to DeWine, and had a huge binder full of examples, and said, essentially, Governor DeWine, this guy is like in First Energy's pocket, and he's going to do whatever they want him to do, and don't hire him as head of the Public Utilities Commission. But DeWine went ahead and did it anyway. So essentially, this thrust of this article was that DeWine was warned, and so he knew what he was doing. And I would recommend, if anybody's at all interested in House Bill 6, to read this article, because it was the best conglomeration of all the different horrible, outrageous things associated with House Bill 6. It put out the whole history of it, basically, including the famous text where, after it passed, one of the First Energy people took a picture of Mount Rushmore and put like Sam Randazzo and DeWine's heads on there, and said basically the F word, which I can't say on the radio, anybody who's not us. And so give a read at this article at the Ohio Capitol Journal. Next, we have reached, we often go back and look at the data coming from the Mauna Loa station for the NOAA, where they keep track of all sorts of greenhouse gases and stuff. We've reached record methane levels. It increased. The average amount increased from 2020. It had gone up 15.3 parts per billion in 2020. It went up 17 parts per billion in 2021, which is a record increase, and it led to a record level. And that is right now, the record level is 1,895.7 parts per billion. And methane is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide in terms of being a greenhouse gas. And we have reported in the past that it looks like the methane increase might be becoming what they call exponential, might be starting to follow that exponential curve.
Uh-oh.
And there's just basically some more evidence that perhaps that is actually what's going on. So something to think about. Next, you may have heard about the Chernobyl contamination. Apparently when Russia took over Chernobyl, and my theory about that, I talked about it when it happened, is that Putin was going to try to take the nuclear power plants and put his own people in charge of them so that he didn't have a repeat of the Chernobyl meltdown as they attack these nuke plants, because that's what brought down the Soviet Union. It's one of the big things that brought down the Soviet Union. He didn't want to have a repeat of that. Well, I was right, because now that they've returned it to Ukraine and the people who work there are starting to talk. Yes, as soon as they took over, they brought in a whole bunch of Russians from the Russian nuclear power agency, and they tried to shut the thing down, or they tried to take over. They failed. But B, the soldiers had no idea about Chernobyl. They'd never heard the history, because it's like one of the most embarrassing things in Russian history. And so they were setting up camp in what's called the Red Forest, which is the most contaminated area, radioactively contaminated area on the planet.
This is the thing. Everybody wants to talk about, like, oh, Ukraine is the victim. It's so awful what's happening to Ukraine. Russians are evil. But you know who else is suffering? Russian soldiers.
Yeah.
Who do not know, who don't have a choice, don't know what they're going into, all that stuff.
Right. And Ukraine has reported that these soldiers who were digging trenches in the most radioactively contaminated area in the world, one of the reasons they left is that the soldiers started suffering from radiation sickness. They started vomiting, started losing their hair. And in fact, according to the Ukrainian officials, one soldier even died of radiation sickness before they left. And this is an interesting point, because lots of U.S. officials have gone out of their way to deny what the Ukrainian officials are saying. I've seen interviews saying, we don't have any evidence that there was any kind of radiation sickness. But I'm like, you believe the Ukrainians on all the other stuff.
Yeah, suddenly now they're lying. Alrighty.
Right. But I did happen to catch yesterday at 11 o'clock in the morning, CNN International actually sent a reporter to Chernobyl, and he took a dose meter with him, and that dose meter started going off. And the levels reach the point where the sirens start going off on your dose meter. And he went to the edge of the forest. He didn't actually go into the most contaminated part.
Oh, great. He didn't even go in. That's wonderful.
And even there at the edge, it was his dose meter is reading 50 times background radiation.
Uh-oh.
And when you are in a contaminated area like that, that means those are billions of little radioactive particles that you can ingest, you can breathe in. They can, if you're eating out there, and apparently they had no radiation protection gear at all. So they were just like camping in the radiation. And if you're already at 50 times background level on the edge of a contaminated area, it's very easy to believe, and I believe, that when you get into the middle of it, you're getting doses that are going to cause acute radiation sickness. And the thing to remember about radiation is
nobody deserves what is going to happen to these poor SOBs, seriously.
No, absolutely not. And the thing that about radiation sickness and radiation exposure is that the effects are so random that you can expose two different people to the same amount of radiation and have like totally different effects. One person can be completely devastated by it, and the next person seems like it doesn't even hurt them. And the reason is that these particles get distributed randomly in the body, and where they end up and where they actually irradiate things helps determine how serious sickness you get.
Which makes sense. Yeah. Which part of the body are they targeting?
Right. Like, are they hitting critical nerve centers, for example?
Right.
And so that's why, like, when you look at the maps for atomic bomb explosions, there's this region where they call it the 50% region, where 50% of the people in this region will die from the radioactivity. You just don't know which 50%. So it's very easy to believe that some of the soldiers were so seriously affected that they actually died, even though, maybe the majority of them didn't. But so take our government's denial that exposure to radiation had no effect on people. Take that with a grain of salt. And again, on this one, I accept the word of the Ukrainian government, which is saying these guys got sick, and that's one of the reasons they left. All right. So I wanted to talk one more story, kind of a fun and uplifting story, but
finally,
yeah. In Italy, they have had problems with illegal trawling fishing, which they have the people that have been fishing there for multiple generations, hundreds of generations sometimes, and they go along with their fishing lines and they take some of the fish, but they've learned over the generations how much they can take without hurting the actual fishery, so that they just can continuously take fish, which is part of the green future, is that when we all get that realization and understand that and leave enough of the fish that we can continue to have as much fish as we want forever. But unfortunately, these illegal trawling operations have come in, and they drag big nets along the bottom, and they basically catch everything, and they wipe out the plants that support the fish.
And the living of the local fishermen.
And the living of the local fishermen. So the authorities have had very little success in stopping these trawlers. So this one guy, Paolo Fanciulli, took matters into his own hands, and he created a nonprofit organization called the House of Fish, or Casa dei Pesci. And what they do is they put sculptures into the water. They made these huge granite sculptures of, they're really quite beautiful. They're mostly human figures. And
I bet they will really, really mess up your fishing nets, too.
They do, exactly. They're designed to catch the trawler nets.
Beautiful and highly destructive.
Yes, both, yeah. Quite a combination. So it's worked. He's put about 39 of these sculptures so far around the bay where his family has fished for generations.
Excellent.
And the trawlers have stopped going there because they keep getting their nets destroyed.
Yep.
This was in something called Euronews. It was published on March 12th, and again, an unwieldy title. Italian fishermen sinks illegal trawlers with otherworldly underwater sculptures. Now, that's a mouthful. Yeah, but it's slightly misleading because he's not really sinking trawlers. They're not.
Right.
They're not hitting these sculptures and sinking, but they are.
Metaphorically, their business in that area is being sunk.
Right. Exactly. So that was kind of fun. Kind of a fun story. I kind of liked that. So, all right, we're almost done here. Just another couple minutes. Just one more story that I kind of picked up on this past week. This story actually came out December 13th, actually December 16th. And this was that in the Central Virginian, and the title is Inspector Pleads Guilty to False Information. Turns out that the NRC resident inspector at the nuclear power plant there in Virginia lied about actually doing inspections and things.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much what you do if you work ever in the food service industry. You really don't check, you go in and you write on the inspection chart 5 times in a row and check it once, but...
Right, and so that's what he was doing with a nuclear power plant.
That's only going to give a couple people cholera or something,
Whereas a nuke plant, you do that, and it was the fire and flood response technology that he was just signing off on. So had there been an actual fire or an actual flood, it may well have failed, and we might, be abandoning Virginia right now. But just another reminder that the nuclear industry is just so corrupt. So anyway, Thanks so much for listening. I hope those of you that are listening for the first time live, or those of you who just started downloading our podcast, were not disappointed. And thanks you, Rebecca, for your report on Muslim environmental activists. We're going to be back next week. Start thinking about Earth Day, folks. It's coming up April 22nd. And thanks again. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
Demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run